up, man? We're back.
What's going on?
Hopefully soon we will have on Adam Breneman. It should be a great guest, and we'll know shortly. If not, you have the two greatest podcasters available to you. But before I do any more of that, we're going to go to myfootballcamps.com/D1 promo. If you're looking to get recruited, me and Mike Farrell have a program just for you that will help you out. He was Rivals analyst for 25 years, the national analyst, the number one guy. I was probably the inventor of the combines as it is today. And from an analyst standpoint, that there's nobody that has reached out to more coaches, players, dealt with some of the best in the country to help you get promoted. And you can leverage our following minds, which is on Twitter alone, it's 600,000. Mike's is, I think, 300. And then let's not even talk about, obviously, what we're reaching now with YouTube. We reached 57 million this past month alone. So we're continuing to grow. Obviously, people are chiming in, coming into the podcast today as we're looking forward to having Adam, and hopefully we will have him soon. I have not heard anything. So maybe Coach might want to send him a quick message while we're getting ready. But before we – oh, there he is. Perfect. And before we bring him on, free agency's been going wild today. So
sorry, Giant fans. All the Giant fans out there crying away. Oh, my Saquon Barkley. And he goes into the division. So you get to see him twice a year, my friends. Sorry, guys.
I know. So without further ado, we'll bring on our guest. He was one of the top recruits in the country, originally went to Penn State as a tight end. I remember him coming up when he was in high school. That probably dates me a little bit, of course. And he was a fantastic player. He went to play at Penn State. I think he finished at UMass. When the coaching,
All-American.
Yep, was All-American. I believe he was an All-American in high school, first team All-American in high school.
Oh, absolutely. He was the I think he was one of the number one tight end recruit in the country.
Yep, in the country. Coached in college for several years.
Arizona State.
Yep, and now is a media sensation. He's interviewed some of the top coaches in the country, among other people. Let's bring him on without further ado. Adam Breneman. How's everything going, Adam?
I'm great. Appreciate you guys having me on. I'm excited to be here.
We're excited to have you. We're excited to have you.
I truly appreciate you calling me a media sensation. I hope someday I live up to that kind of intro.
Well, hey, you're on your way, buddy. I think you're doing everything right. Your path is a little bit different than everybody else's. So, uniqueness has a way of finding itself to the top, my friend. So I think you're doing a great job from our perspective anyway. So really appreciate you coming on, taking the time, man. We look forward to it.
I appreciate it. Appreciate having me on and love what you guys are doing. So appreciate having me on.
It's fantastic to talk to you. Just for people who may not know about you, just kind of give a little bit of your journey. And I think we hit on some of the points, but I remember what kind of athlete you were. So, because I was one of the combines and showcases as you were coming up, and I remember where what type of player you are. But talk about your journey from where you are to where you are now.
Yeah, it's been quite an interesting ride. It has been the one thing I've learned during my journey is that whatever you think is going to happen, whatever you think the plan is that you have for yourself, it never actually goes that way. It's just all about how you respond to things. I've seen a lot of college football, seen a lot of football. I mean, you guys mentioned it a little bit, but was a 5-star recruit, depending on where you looked, 4-star some places. Top 1 or 2 tight ends in the country coming out of high school. Had offers from everywhere. Went to Penn State. Had a good start at Penn State. Was a freshman All-American at Penn State, and then had a knee injury. Missed 2 years in a row. Thought I was done playing football. My knee was not getting any better. Thought I was done, and miraculously my knee started to feel better, and I transferred to UMass. Played at UMass for 2 years, as you mentioned, and was an All-American 2 years in a row. I mean, I was catching like 75 passes a year as a tight end, led the country in receiving by a tight end, Mackey Award finalist. And then right before the NFL draft, I was at the Senior Bowl. I was at the Combine. failed physicals with my left knee. The same knee that had the issues at Penn State was not fully healed. It was still giving me issues. So I ended up, realizing that no team was going to pick me up because of my left knee. And about a month before the draft, just decided to, didn't really have another choice but retire from football, which was tough at 23 years old. I was just a two-time All-American and retired from the game. So it's tough. I always make the joke. Not really funny, but I was about as close to playing the NFL as anyone's ever been without actually playing in the NFL. Like I wasn't even I didn't even make I didn't even have a training camp. I had to retire. I couldn't play anymore. And when that happened, it was tough, but I've always loved the game of football. I love what this sport has given to me. I look back on my time, and it's easy to say, woe is me. And I missed on all this money. I wish I could have played longer. And I feel all those things, but at the same time, I've also lived the dream that very few people get to live. I was a 3-time All-American. I was I got to do all those kind of things and have those relationships and those connections. And then got into coaching, coached with Herm Edwards at Arizona State for about 2 years, was a tight ends coach there, was the youngest coach in the country when I was there as the tight ends coach. Our staff was Herm Edwards, Antonio Pierce, Marvin Lewis, a bunch of great ones in the coaching world. And then when I left Arizona State, was really trying to figure out what I wanted to do next, and saw this kind of gap in media and thought that there wasn't a great college football voice that was talking about the game, breaking down the game. And I felt like I had unique credibility with all those experiences to talk about this great sport, and went all in on it on social media. And now it's evolved to, content all over the platforms, my podcast that you mentioned where I interview coaches and players. And then I'm a broadcaster. I work for CBS and ESPN, call games on Saturdays, among a bunch of other things. But that's the journey. It's on a mission now to be one of the premier faces and voices in the game of college football.
Well, you're on a fast track there. So I've been following you, and Coach D's been following you for a while as well. I enjoyed your interview with Hafley, but you've interviewed so many coaches, and that's one of the things that really intrigued us tremendously, because obviously we're talking to coaches. That's like, we've had them on from guys that are currently coaching to guys who are long retired and let it spill, let it all spill out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's really cool to have you on and talk about those experiences. Now, first of all, what do you like better? Because everybody's in the podcast world now. Do you like broadcasting a game better, or do you enjoy meet with people and doing the podcast, or is it equal?
It's just so different. I mean, I mean, when I get ready to call a game, you're going on live television. I mean, your heart's racing, your palms are sweaty. It's like a game, right?
Maybe it's like kickoff.
It's like kickoff. I mean, you got the producer in your ear, counting you down. You're preparing all week. I mean, I show up to do a podcast, I'm just winging the damn thing. I'm I show up and I just sit down and start talking to the coach. It's a little bit of a different spectrum as far as, I'd say the podcasting stuff for me is fun because you get to kind of peel back the layers, and I feel like I've got enough respect in this sport to
100%
for people to do it, and for coaches to know that I'm not going to screw them at the end of the day.
Yep.
But they also know now that I'm not coming to do a podcast with you to talk about who your favorite second string receiver is on the team. I want to know the story. I want to know about Jeff Hafley. What do you hate about college football? James Franklin told a story on my podcast about him getting booed off the field at Penn State and thinking to himself, man, am I going to make it here? Talked to Dan Lanning about the challenges of his wife being sick, and all that kind of stuff I want to really peel back the layers and allow, one of my favorite comments when I do the podcast after it goes out is fans, obviously a lot of times it's new fans from different schools that are now following me or seeing my content. And I get a lot of comments saying I've never seen Coach X. I've never seen Coach Lanning in this format or this way before. I've never seen Coach Franklin talk like this, or I've never seen him be so open. And a lot of times coaches are so buttoned up and
they're so reserved, scared,
worried about what they're going to say. So that's really fun for me. Now the broadcasting gets you feeling like you're playing on Saturdays again. So it's tough to say which one I like the most. But they both complement each other super well too.
Absolutely. No doubt about it. It's really interesting because we've interviewed a few of the college coaches, and you have to kind of put your questions in there, and you got to submit them because there's a lot of people don't realize there's a process to it. and it's completely different than we've interviewed retired Division I coaches, where they sit there and they just have us laughing. Who do we have on that was hilarious? You got to have him on your podcast at some point. He'll have you laughing so hard. Who was that?
We had Coach Tony DeMeo.
Tony DeMeo. Oh God, he's a triple option guy. I don't know if you know the name at all, but famous for really running the gun spread triple option. He's retired, and he coached it like Iona when Valvano was there, and he's telling us all these things. And it's so funny and so interesting seeing how coaches are now. Like coaching is, you're the face of a corporation now. I mean, for lack of a better word, right? And when you talk to a retired coach, obviously he's retired from that corporation and now he's free. I think it's so interesting how coaches have been elevated to this status. And I'm curious from your standpoint, when you've interviewed these guys, do you feel that like some of them have really struggled with these rapid changes in the college football process, not just NIL and transfer portal, but the whole thing, being the CEO essentially at all times, right?
Yeah. College football coaches are sick and tired of what's going on in college football right now. From the transfer portal to NIL to the coach's calendar is what's really brutal. I mean, the calendar they have to deal with of
signing day, and
you got free agency going on during the season. You got coaching staff turnover at an all-time high. Coaches going to the NFL, tampering happening like crazy in college sports. No one really follows the rules, but at the same time, there really aren't any rules because the NCAA is weak. So there's a lot of issues in college sports. At the same time, I don't think college football has ever been in a better spot. I mean, the game's never been stronger, viewership's never been higher. But I do think there's going to need to be some changes because this sport is losing a lot of great coaches to the NFL that don't want to deal with recruiting and dealing with college athletes right now because of what's going on. And I do think too, a lot of college coaches, they all like NIL. They're good with it, right? They're good with the transfer portal. It's the combination and the lack of regulation and the lack of guidance from the NCAA that has caused this kind of chaos. And I don't think Nick Saban retired because NIL is in place. I don't think Nick Saban retired because of the transfer portal. I think Nick Saban retired because of the combination of it all coming at the same time, all at once, and having to deal with players trying to get bribed by other schools to jump in the portal. And Saban talked about in an interview I saw recently at his end of year meeting with every single player, meets with every player on the team. Every single guy almost asked, "How much money are you going to pay me?" Because other school X is offering me this. Is offering this. That's where that's not allowed. That's not supposed to be happening until they get in the portal. And two, in the NFL, there's a general manager that takes care of that. There's the head coach isn't constantly having to deal with these kind of negotiations. So there's some issues in the sport. I think that again, we're in a good spot, but some of these legislation, guidelines, regulation needs to be figured out, whether it's at the federal level with actual law legislation coming into place, or the NCAA, or the Big Ten and the SEC breaking off and forming their own super conference or their own entity that governs college football.
Yeah, there's something that's going to have to happen. I don't know if you get these, but like I get all these search firms that, like they'll send you like the updated jobs, and some of the things I've noticed that are really interesting goes to exactly what you talked about. They're trying to figure out that general manager thing, right? And then there's like an NIL general manager too, right?
Yep.
So you kind of have a structure that's starting to mirror kind of an NFL structure, and then obviously player personnel is going to become, I mean, you see it on every roster, but the old days player personnel just meant making sure you get along with the players. Yeah. Player personnel really is now a guy in an evaluator. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing there.
The sport's changing completely, and the role of general manager is now needed in college football because it's hard for a head coach to manage every aspect, from the NIL to the portal to the roster to allocations of scholarships to compliance to all that stuff. The difference, though, in college football is that the head coach is in charge of the general manager. So at the end of the day, it still all flows up through the head coach, who ultimately has to make that final decision. In the NFL, the general manager hires the head coach a lot of times, or they come in together, and the head coach reports kind of to the general manager. So that's kind of the difference in dynamics. So it's always going to flow through the head coach, which is kind of part of the issue and the reason a lot of these head coaches in college football are wanting to leave. There's also a change in a lot of the structure of actually how you manage a roster and scholarships in college football. Like when I was at Arizona State, as a tight ends coach, I knew that I had 3 scholarship spots for this class, and we were going to take 3 tight ends. So I was in charge of finding the tight ends, evaluating them all over the country, figuring out who I wanted to offer, and recruiting those players. Well, I also at the same time have to do all the recruiting, coach my current team, game plan on the weekdays, and all that kind of stuff. So during the season, I'm not all that focused on evaluating the best tight ends from Louisiana. You know, I don't even know who they are because I'm focused on the season. Where some programs now, Texas Tech is a great example of this, have changed the structure where they said, listen, it doesn't really make sense for our coaches to decide who they're going to offer. Just like in the NFL, the scouts and the general manager decide who the players are, the coaches coach. So at Texas Tech, they're saying we're taking off the plate of our coaches. We're taking off their plate any evaluation of players. Coaches are no longer in charge of evaluating the talent. That's going to be the personnel department who are going to go watch the high school film and decide who we're going to offer and recruit. And that flows up to the GM, and then I think it flows to the head coach. And then the coaches, the coordinators, position coaches, get told who they're recruiting. Just like in the NFL, they get told who they're going to coach. Now, I'm sure the coaches have some say, but for the most part, it's kind of separating the personnel department from the coaching staff. Coaches are just recruiting now. They're getting told who to recruit, and then they're coaching whoever they get. And I think that kind of structure we're going to see more and more of in college sports as things get crazier and crazier.
Right. And you actually see it, like, you know, I know Dion is doing it at Colorado. Like, you see a lot of these staffs now actually, I mean, look, you go to the website and you click on coaches, and it's no longer, you know, head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, position coaches. No, you're seeing player personnel. You're seeing who's responsible for NIL. Each one of, like, college staffs are now expanding, and there's so much, and it's almost like, you know, the off the field guys that aren't on the sideline, that aren't practicing and like running individual every single day. Those guys in the personnel department are almost, if not more important than those guys coaching up the X's and O's.
You think about a guy like Courtney Morgan at Alabama now, general manager at Alabama.
Right. Was at Washington, correct?
It was at Washington with Kalen DeBoer. Was at Michigan before that.
Correct. He's the guy that's responsible for literally putting these rosters. I mean, it was kind of funny. The national championship game, right, was basically based off of, it was like, hey, man, these are your 2 rosters that you created, and now they're both in. And, like, who's the first guy that guy hired when he went to Alabama? The guy that put my roster together. Yeah, I mean,
Courtney Morgan's become one of the more powerful figures in college football because of that. He built those 2 rosters, and most fans don't even know his name. He built Michigan's roster. He built Washington's roster. He's now building Alabama's roster. And that in that general manager spot, yes, he's in charge of all the recruiting department, all the personnel, but he also serves as kind of a senior advisor to the head coach, as someone that they can go off of, they can bounce ideas off of. And when I met with Kalen DeBoer and had him on my podcast when I was at Washington this past year in 2023, I was talking to him off camera just about his staff, and he said, and I was asking him about, you know, Coach Huff, the O-line coach, and about some of the coordinators, and he said to me, he said, Courtney Morgan's one of the most important people in this building because he's in charge of the roster. I mean, that is his baby.
Right. Same thing with Dion. Dion has a personnel guy at Colorado who handles all of the off the field stuff. I mean, you saw in his documentary, you know, on I think Amazon Prime it is, you know, that guy is literally standing in front of the team talking about, guys, this is the guy you need to worry about, right? Because I'm the guy that's going to find your replacement. That's what I'm looking for, you know? And that's kind of the world that we're living in right now.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah, and Dion's completely changed the game from
that's a podcast in itself.
Yeah, branding to what it means to really be a head coach, and it's funny. I got I was trying to get Dan Lanning on my show for a while and wasn't, didn't have much success. It was during the season after the Colorado game when Lanning and the Deion drama was ever. I got a text from Dan Lanning one day. He just sent me he said podcast ? I said I'll come out to Eugene,
right.
coach.
Whenever
I'm ready.
I'm on the flight.
I'm on the way, coach. I'm ready. I'll be out there. But yeah, it is funny. It's been cool to see that shift of, I think 5 years ago, there's no shot that Dan Lanning would have sat down for an hour to talk about his life. There's no shot that Kalen DeBoer would have done it, or James Franklin, or Shane Beamer. Like it would have been.
You got Greg Schiano, friend,
Greg Schiano. I've known a lot. I know a lot of people who know Greg Schiano really well, and
he doesn't do that.
Yeah, the coolest thing for me are people were like, first of all, how did you get him for an hour and a half talking?
Yeah, man.
And like, how'd you get him to open up so much? It was so cool because he recruited me to Rutgers back in the day.
But that's where your journey, your path can benefit you, you know what I mean? Like that network you had from being that 5-star athlete gets you in the door with these guys to sit down and open up. I mean, the intro to that was like, "Hey, buddy, what's going on? How you been?" It was like you guys were best friends,
Yeah, no, it's been fun. Yeah, Coach Schiano he came ready to talk, which I was excited about. He was fired up for it. So yeah, it's been fun.
No, I think it's interesting how you're able to get them to open up. I think that relationship, I think what Derek said is really true. The fact that a lot of these guys recruited you. And it makes a huge, huge impact. And people don't realize that the football world at the high level, it's like a big circle. Like,
it's all about relationships.
There's no such thing as like 6 degrees of separation. It's like 1 or 2 degrees, you know what I mean, of separation. So, this guy or that guy, and it's a pretty tight circle. It's very interesting to see because of that, on recruiting with like parents, how and maybe even high school coaches too, but they're on the outside looking in at a lot of this stuff. So I'm curious your thoughts on it because obviously you were a big time recruit. Maybe you didn't have to deal with some of the things that they deal with now because it was a different time. But I wonder what either coaches think or what even you think about what they should be doing from a recruiting standpoint, because it's totally different. They're so uneducated. It's amazing. In an era of information, you might find this fascinating. In an era of information, they really don't understand as much, right? They're trying to figure it all out. And high school coaches are trying to figure it all out. And it's hard to get information from college coaches because they want to maintain the relationship and they don't know what's going to happen from one semester to the next because of transfer portal. So they're trying to maintain relationship with players they might be interested in, but they may not be ready to pull the trigger on. What are some of the things that you're seeing and what do you think can help some of these people?
I think the most important thing for these recruits to understand is the true meaning of what an offer really is.
Yes.
That is the biggest misconception in college football recruiting. An offer does not mean that you have a guaranteed scholarship spot at a school. It doesn't. An offer nowadays means we are interested in you, at least at the FBS Power 5 level.
Right.
FBS in general. And I'll use this example of how it worked when I was the tight ends coach at Arizona State just a couple years ago. I was told that I get 2 scholarship spots in the 2021 class to sign 2 tight ends. I got to find those tight ends, as we just talked about. That doesn't mean that I go offer 2 tight ends because I'm at Arizona State and I got to compete with USC and Penn State and all these other schools. And also, I'm a great recruiter. I want to go out. I want to go after the best tight ends in the country. But what's the realistic chances that the number 3 tight end in the country comes to Arizona State?
Right.
Not great, but I'm still going to shoot my shot, right? Shoot or shoot, baby. I'm going to go shoot my shot and try to recruit the best players in the country. So if I just offered the top 2 guys for my 2 spots, I probably wouldn't get them, and I'd be left with no tight ends. So instead of offering 2, I have to go offer like 12 tight ends. And I got to go throw them out offers and then see who's really interested, who is from the West Coast and wants to actually come, who wants to take a visit. And then you normally say that you want to have about 5 to 6 players really interested with an offer for every spot you have. So like that means if I have 2 spots, I need to offer 10 guys that are really interested in coming to my school. And then you have a board where you rank those 10 guys you offered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And if the number 7 guy tries to commit, I got to make a decision. Where am I with number 1 through 6 that I want more than that guy? It's all a numbers game. And then do I take that commitment or do I push them off and see if I can get 1 through 6? It's all a game of numbers. And you see schools all over the country. Some schools do it differently, but every school offers more players than they can actually take. Every school in the country. Now, some, like when we were at Arizona State, we were very liberal with our offers. Like we threw out offers all the time just to kind of get in the door. Some schools are a little bit more conservative, but they're all offering more. So like having an offer doesn't mean you're guaranteed. Don't know. So it's a game that you got to understand as a recruit and make sure that when you're getting offered, you ask the coach,
is this committable?
Is this committable? How many other players are you offering at my position? And those are fair questions to ask. And don't expect them to say, we're only offering you. And, you know, that's not going to be – if they say that, they're lying, right? If they say if they tell you that, they're lying. But, yeah, I think that's important to understand. I mean, in the day and age of social media, I'm a big believer that you should be creating content online around yourself, around playing football, around your journey.
You got to market yourself.
You got to market yourself. I mean, the amount of players that I actually would find from just my DMs, social media, people sending me things on DMs, on Twitter DMs. I mean, I was checking my Twitter DMs all the time as a coach and seeing who was in there and who was sending me film. And I would review it or someone on my staff that if I had an intern they would check my DMs and I'd say, hey, go through these DMs. Cause like if they reach out to me on DM, they're interested. So let's see if we can find anyone, you know, are there any offensive linemen under the radar that we need to look at here? So I would put yourself out there. And number 3, the final thing, it takes some grit and some tenacity to, if you're a lower level recruit that doesn't have the big time offers, but you want to go play FCS football or group of 5 football, it takes some work where you got to go send like 2,000 emails to coaches. I mean, when I was trying to be a coach, I sent 500 emails one night to different coaches. It's not that hard. You go online, you do some digging, you go in the athletic department directory, you find some email addresses, and it may not be the coaches. And let me put this out there too. The coach isn't the one you want to message or DM. That's not who you want to hit up. You don't want to hit up the coach. You don't want to hit up the head coach. You want to hit up someone in the recruiting department. You want to hit up someone in like an analyst role, a graduate assistant, because all those are people are young guys that are trying to make a name for themselves, who are evaluating the recruits and then giving them to the coaches to sign off on and look at more. So the way to get in is like my recruiting intern at ASU would bring me 15 players a day to evaluate. Those were 15 guys that he just found on his own, bringing to me. So you want to get on their radar because they'll actually respond to you. They'll actually look at your stuff.
Those are the ones that are going to answer.
And then
those
you get
are the
in the
ones
door.
that are going to put in that work. Those are the ones that are going to answer you. Those are the ones that are going to
exactly.
Put in
They'll actually
They're going to say,
answer.
"Oh, look at this guy. Like maybe if I bring him to, if we hit on this guy, that's my guy. Like I could use that, right?"
100%. That happens so many times. The amount of times that there was a guy that worked for me, Andy Reinhardt, who was kind of like an analyst role, wasn't a full-time coach. He would bring me players that he found through Twitter DMs. A lot of these were players that reach out to him, like I just said, and he'd bring them to me, knowing like standing on the table for the guy, knowing that if it pans out well, like that's his guy. He brought me that guy, right? And he found this player from the middle of nowhere in Montana that we're going to go sign at Arizona State. If he becomes big time, there he is. So. There's a lot of opportunities out there. It just takes some grit and tenacity and putting the work in.
You made some great points. It's funny because me and Coach talk about this all the time, and you're explaining it to parents quite often. And it's funny. There's this air of and I've been doing this for a long time, but there's still this air of they don't believe that this is actually the case. And you say you have to reaching out is a full-time job. Listen. There are some guys that are super slam dunks. You cannot put yourself in those categories, right? So even the guys outside of the top 200, 250 still have to work to get themselves multiple offers, right? Yeah, those top 250 players in the country, those are your 4 and 5 stars that they might be like the slam dunks, right? But those high 3-stars, those guys end up with 10 offers. Some of them have to work to be able to get those offers. It's really, really great point you brought up about who to reach out to, how important that is, and in the era of social media, how there's so many guys in these staffs that if the more guys that you're reaching out to from an analyst standpoint, it creates possibly an opportunity for you, which I think is it's really interesting because it's changed so much. And there are guys that, I'm friends with that play D1 football, and then they'll come to me and they'll say, I have no idea how to approach this with my son. And they were Division I football players themselves, and sometimes guys who were literally coaches of big time high schools, with their own kids, they're sometimes like, okay, what's the direction that I should go? So I think that information is unbelievably valuable for them to understand what the world is like, the landscape is like right now in recruiting. You know what I think is all people would find really interesting too. Obviously, you were an All-American. I mean, you did great things on the field. Talk a little bit, and we'll go back in time a little bit here. Yeah. Talk a little bit about what you did as a player, right? There's players out there want to be the kind of player that you were in college and would have been in the NFL, obviously, if it wasn't for injuries. But they want to be that kind of. Talk about what you were coming up and the things that you worked on and you did to make yourself the player you were.
I knew in my career that by the time I was in college, I learned pretty quickly that I wasn't the most athletic guy in the world. I wasn't going to jump a 40-inch vertical. I wasn't going to run a 40-yard dash. But there were things that I knew that I could work on that would put me in the great category. And one was my hands, catching the football. That's my recommendation to anyone who plays receiver. If you want to differentiate yourself, let me back up a second. Coaches want to give the ball and want to play players that they trust, that they know will do the job when it matters the most. Not necessarily the guy who can run in a straight line the fastest, not the guy who wins the 5-10-5 shuttle drill during conditioning. They want the guy that they don't need to think twice. When they see the play on their call sheet and the ball's going to you, it's not like, do I trust them in this moment? If it's a big moment, who does the coach trust the most? And as a receiver, usually that's the player that catches the ball the best. That's normally who it is. It's the guy with the most sure hands. That's who I wanted to be. So I went on this meticulous routine of catching 200 passes a day, of grip strength and handwork, of doing drills where I'd track the ball over my shoulder. Working. I mean, I'm talking like I would see like eyesight doctors to make sure I could see that I had things from like thinking about the different kind of strips I'd wear in my eyes under the lights to make sure I didn't lose the ball in the lights. Every little thing mattered to me because I wanted to be the guy that made the plays when it mattered the most. And I knew I wasn't going to be faster than everybody else. And it worked. I mean, there was a time, I don't know if it still stands, but when I retired, I remember Pro Football Focus put out that I had the most consecutive catches without a drop in the Pro Football Focus era in college football.
It's incredible.
Now, I'm sure that's been broken. That's like one of those stats where it's like, it's like there's so many nuances to it. It's like most catches by a guy that's 20 years old who's, who's 6'4", who's from Pennsylvania.
They call it LeBron stat, right? Because they'll make up stats. So
make up whatever you want. But so that was a big thing for me. I think too, I always tried to a little bit of like an off the field tidbit. I went through a lot of adversity in my career. I mentioned I missed 2 years in a row at Penn State. I was on a really high and then some really low lows. But the one thing I always tried to do was be a positive force in the locker room. And I knew that I can't control a lot of things that happen to me. What I could control is the attitude I brought every single day. And I know that if you ask my teammates when I was at Penn State, or if you ask James Franklin about me when I was on his team and was hurt, they would all say, I think, that no matter what was going on, that I was positive, that I brought energy in the locker room. I was a positive guy, that you wouldn't know I was going through some of that injury stuff, that I was just a positive force. And I think a positive attitude can really cure everything. That's one of Coach Franklin's core values at Penn State is positive attitude. And it's so true. Your mindset can really dictate your circumstances, and don't let your circumstance dictate your mindset. So it's that was something I think that people and athletes who are internally positive and then you see it externally have a tendency just to work out better. Things end up working out their way. They end up making plays when the game's on the line because of that attitude they carry themselves with every single day. And there's nothing worse than a negative Nancy, than the negative person in the locker room who's always complaining, who's blaming the coaches, who's blaming other people. That's nothing that you want to be around the locker room. So being positive, no matter where you're at on that spectrum of being an athlete, to freshman to senior to great to not playing, positivity can cure it all.
Those are great points. I think, first of all, positivity, it's a contagious thing, right? So
No doubt.
I love that James Franklin uses that as his mantra, because if you have positivity, it's contagious. It goes throughout the organization, throughout your team. And when you have negativity, it's also contagious, but it's destructive, right? So It's a different kind of contagious, right? So positive being contagious goes throughout your organization in a great way. Negativity, it's also contagious, but it's destructive to the organization, and nothing good comes out of it. It's one of the things, like, we talk about all the time, like when you have coaches on your group chat, right? Or you have players on a group chat, something could happen.
It's always that one.
Yeah. Well, if that could change something, everybody's thought processes almost immediately in today's era, right? Almost immediately, right? And everyone's like asking a question about it. But when you have guys that are positive and have the right viewpoint, they also could change people's viewpoints almost immediately in the right direction. And in college football, I mean, high school football, college football, obviously these guys are all in different group chats. But in college football, I mean, that it has to be difficult, because coaches, that could literally dictate your career, right? Something happens that day on the field in practice, not addressed properly. You're on some level of eggshells, and all of a sudden you're dealing with certain things. I think that has to be something that, and obviously you really have just the way your approach is to everything is super positive. I'd probably hire you as my GM right away. I'd bring you up there just to get everybody on the right page. But it's talk about, like, how do they handle that? Like, how did you guys handle it in the locker room? Because you are still obviously in the modern era. There was when I played there was no texting. You had to go in. Call the guy on the phone, then he'd have to come over, then you'd have to all be hanging out. So talk about how coaches may handle it. How do you guys handle it as players, and how do you got things in the right direction?
Yeah, I think one of the great balances for coaches to figure out is, how do you balance being close with the players and having a really good relationship of being trusting and loving, but at the same time, you're not their best friend.
Coach, right?
Coach. And it's something that when I was 25 when I was the tight ends coach at Arizona State. My starting tight end was Curtis Hodges, plays for the Commanders, who's 23. So
you could have had guys on your roster that were older than you.
Yeah, I mean, it was tough. Yeah, exactly. Like there were guys that were my age, and it was.
Or guys in your recruiting class still on a roster.
Exactly. It was an interesting dynamic. And, the reason I got that job was because of the relationships I had, and because I could recruit, and players wanted to come play for me, because it was like, I want to go play for the young tight ends coach, and I could go get those players to come. But at the same time, Herm Edwards used to always say to me, he would always say, you can't be their friend. You can't be their friend. You can't be their friend. And that means, like, even making sure that I'm a young guy, making sure you don't go out at the same place as your players are going out, making sure that they don't see you in public.
You don't want to be at the table next to them with a pitcher of beer, just like
exactly. So, but I think that is a really fine balance that a lot of coaches have to deal with. Everyone, young coaches and older. And I think the great ones are able to toe that line so well. I think of a Dan Lanning, of a James Franklin, of a guys who are known to have really strong relationships with their players, that truly know they care about them, but also can be extremely demanding and can be, extremely tough on people. And I remember, again, I'm referencing a lot of Coach Franklin quotes here. I remember Coach Franklin said one time, he said, you can be incredibly demanding of people if they simply know that you care about them. Yes. And that is where the balance comes of, making sure that you have that kind of dynamic in your relationship and it doesn't skew too much one way or the other. It has to be in the middle, is when it solves a lot of issues, because then your players trust you enough to come talk to you about issues or come talk to you about things that that they may not be comfortable talking to most coaches about. At the same time, they're going to be on time to your meetings. They're going to not wear a hat when they show up to their team meeting. They're going to not have earphones in their meeting. They're going to be paying attention, because they also have that respect for you as a coach and as a person. And what I found most is that players want to play hard for coaches they care about. And when you make it a we thing, and we're doing this together, I would hope that when my tight end goes out and performs, that part of their thought process is, it's not just me out there. It's I want to go perform to make my coach proud because of the effort and the care he puts into me. So I think that's the dynamic. And when you have that, it kind of fixes everything else. You have the leadership in the locker room that can handle any issues, that can get kind of the cancers of the locker room out there. You have the team that's coached well, that also has the internal players that can make things happen and make sure everyone's rowing the boat in the same direction.
It's a great point.
It's a fantastic point. If you had a crystal ball, where do you see like a lot of the things going? Like, we grace you, Adam Breneman, the czar of the new NCAA, which would not be called the NCAA, but the czar of the new organization. What would you like to see happen, and some of the things you'd like to see in college football?
I wish I had I've been asked this a lot, and I don't have a great answer for what it all looks like. I think a few things. How it all comes together, I don't know. But I do know that, number one, college football needs a governing body and a governing commissioner or person in charge. When you think about
one from the NCAA, a separate,
right? Like football needs its own commission.
Let me explain. There is no college football commissioner. Who's in charge of college football? So like if I ask you that question, who would your answer be? We as someone else, someone different would give it. Is it Charlie Baker, the NCAA president? Or my argument is that the people really in charge of college football are Greg
the ones
Sankey.
that pick the playoffs.
Yes, Greg Sankey.
It's Greg Sankey. It's the commissioner of the Big Ten, the commissioner of the Big 12. But the fact that Greg Sankey is the most powerful man in college football as the SEC commissioner, Greg Sankey is also responsible for swimming and diving and women's softball and basketball and lacrosse. Like, he's also responsible for all these other sports. So how can he put football first and make the best football decision when he also has to make sure that men's basketball in the SEC is doing well at the same time?
Right.
There needs to be one person in charge of college football and in charge of making sure that everything goes the way it should. So that's number one. Find a college football commissioner. Nick Saban would be great. I nominate myself. No, I'm just kidding. Coach,
you don't want to do that, bro.
No, I don't want to do that. Coach Sue would be great.
You'd have to pay me some buku bucks.
Yeah, we couldn't afford Coach Schumann. We couldn't afford it. But yeah, I think that's where it starts. I think that that having some kind of guidelines on how many times a player can transfer is important. And finding a way to make sure that players are transferring because it's best for them, and that there's not tampering and things going on outside of what's allowed. And then eventually the main thing here is at some point soon, athletes are going to become employees, and there will be revenue sharing on the TV contracts with them. It's going to happen. Everyone knows it. Every AD I talk to knows it's going to happen. Every head coach knows it's going to happen. No one will say it because they're afraid of getting sued. But everyone knows it's going to happen pretty soon.
And that's what the Dartmouth players, right, Coach? That's what they did. They said they're declaring themselves employees or something along those lines.
Yeah, I think it was a basketball team or somebody. One team at Dartmouth has literally said, like, we're going to be. This is what we want to do. This is how we're going to do it. And like you said, I think it's all going to trickle down. It's going to happen eventually. I think a lot of people feel the same way you do about, a governing body and somebody ultimately who's in control, who can just focus on football. I think the limiting of the transfer thing is something that should happen. And like you said, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you enforce it. But like you said, you can't have a guy literally transferring every other year because this is a better opportunity or this is that or whatever. The NIL stuff, that's a whole different world, right? Like, I think that whole aspect of it, like, I believe college athletes should get paid. You know, I sure as hell would have loved a check every week or for whatever for, you know, when I was in college, because as a D3 player, man, you don't get shit. And, you know, you literally are playing for the love of the game. But that's a whole different thing. But I think these guys deserve it. The amount of time that you put in. I mean, you just think about what you told us that you put into the game as a player, right? And now that's extra. That's not on top of, hey, you have a lift at this time, and then you got to be here for meetings at this time, practice here. You got to host an official visit guy. Like, there are a lot of things that Division I athletes do that a lot of people don't see, because all they do is they see them when they turn on the TV, right? So I think all that stuff's going to happen. It's just a matter of how it all goes down and when it goes down. But I think one of the things that you said that was great was the calendar has to change. There's just too much going on at one time for all of these guys to be handling it the right way. It's why they cut corners, because they're forced to do that just based off of time restraints and things of that nature. Yeah,
100%. Yeah, and we're gonna. I think we're gonna see the calendar change. They're gonna move up the early signing period. I just saw. But it's time. I mean, these coaches have to deal with bowl prep in the middle of dealing with the portal and recruiting their own roster, and it's too much right now. And coaches aren't able to actually have a life, which then causes
is
them
horrible,
to not
right?
coach
And that's
better.
brutal. Like, that's why you see some of these guys are divorced. Who's here? Whose family's living here? But this guy's coaching here. And then, like you said, I mean, if it doesn't change, you're going to see a lot of college coaches make that jump to the NFL, because why wouldn't I?
And what's amazing is what you touched on way early in the podcast, that all of this college football is more viewers than ever.
It's booming.
It's booming, obviously, especially at the top end, right? And then you have the because of that, like, it's one of these weird things, like with combination of social media, all this stuff constantly happening, all the content being produced around it. It's more exciting for people than ever. It's like it's almost like the controversy of it all makes it more exciting than ever too. It's
again back to the whole clicks thing, right? Like, everybody's looking for clicks, and this is what sells. This is what people want to see. They don't want to hear the great good old boy story about, hey, this guy worked really hard for 3 years and now he's the starter and all this other kind of jive. No, man, they want to hear about how he's been at 4 different schools in 2 years and now he's this guy or he's that guy. They want to hear that stuff.
Yeah, and I will say, I mean, for all the negative stuff we talk about with the portal and NIL, I mean, you think about some of the guys who have had these opportunities to find second homes, and to ask the transfer portal has given us so many amazing stories in college football. To ask a player, an 18-year-old or 17-year-old, to make the right decision the first time is a really big ask. I mean, that's tough to do, and I think it's right that we give them an opportunity to find the right fit. But at some point, I mean, the story of like 4 or 5 different transfers is nuts. I'll tell you a story, a crazy story about just the inside part of NIL in college football right now. I was talking to a Power 5 quarterback who was a very good quarterback at a big-time program, starter. And he called me. He said, hey, Adam, I want to get your advice on if I should transfer or not. I said, listen, like, why would you transfer? You know, like, you have a great situation. You're the starter at a Power 5 program. You guys could be in the playoff the next year. Maybe not playoff, but like, you guys could be really good.
Right, you're close.
You're close. Why would you go somewhere else? The grass isn't always greener. And he said to me, listen, I know that I may not play in the NFL for 12 years. I may not be a top NFL draft pick. I need to go make as much money as possible while I'm in college. And my value is way more. It goes up a ton when I enter that transfer portal. Just like employment works, right? You
like,
work more when you go hit the open market. Free agency, everyone wants what they can't have. So your value goes up. So he ends up hitting the transfer portal, transfers to a new school, gets paid 3 times what he was getting paid at his previous school. If all else was equal, I know he would have preferred to stay at his old school, but he couldn't because, and I don't blame him. He's like, I need to make as much money as I can for my family in my last year of playing college football. So That's the part that we have to fix, right? Like,
Right.
how do we make it where you aren't just worth more because you're transferring? Let's make it a level playing field, salary cap it like the NFL does. Everyone's got the same amount of money. Make it like that, where now his current school can pay him what he's actually worth. They don't need to go get the donor funds together to go pay him at a new school.
Right. Right. And it's crazy, right? Because you think about that. You think about a college kid, right? And hey, I got to make as much money in college. Whereas it used to be, my friend, you're going to college to get a degree to go make money in the work world. Not, I only have 4 years to make as much money as I can. And then, like, how about that degree you're getting, buddy? You know, it's like the mind is just so far separated from that. Like, we're talking about all this stuff. And at the same time, it's like, my man, like, you got to go to class, bro.
Yeah.
Like,
well, well, let's be honest. The term student athlete is no longer a real thing. I mean, you really think that, like, do you think that Caleb Williams is worried one bit about COM 107 class? I mean, you think any of these guys actually care about going to class? The average Power 5 starter is making like $40,000 a month, like in NIL payments from their collective. That ain't even like doing deals. That's just like a monthly stipend they're getting from their collective.
That's basically like saying, hey, I have minimum wage, right? Like,
guys, I'm telling you, I was at a school this season, and I had a few podcasts where I had a bunch of players over to an Airbnb I was at, and all these players pulled up. I'm talking like blacked out Range Rover. I'm talking Mercedes AMG. I'm talking an Audi Q8, blacked out, tinted windows.
Well,
I'm coming back as a kicker. I'm coming back as a kicker.
2024 Escalade. There was a backup D tackle pulled up in a 2024 Escalade. That's like a $108,000 car.
And you're going, wait a minute. What? How come I couldn't have been in this era?
I mean, man, you telling me I missed out on this, man.
Right, and you were close to it.
Think about the money you would have made.
You were right here.
Man, I would have had the toughest car on campus. I would have been. I would have been unbearable if I was making $40,000 a month in college. My confidence would have been at an all-time
Well, think about it. I could like you back. Those guys used to get whatever their Pell Grants, all right, and those guys would be like, "I'm rich," and it was like $800.
Crazy.
My $2,200 got me to down to Foxwoods Casino every semester.
Coach went to UConn, so Coach went to UConn.
Where I went and blew half it, then I blew it again on spring break.
Yeah, I mean, BJ Robinson, right, running back from Texas.
Oh yeah,
he was on the pivot. He was on the pivot talking about, I'm riding around in a Lambo.
Yeah, that's right. I remember that. Well, now he's making even more in the pros. But it's
now he's got Kirk Cousins, so he's all right.
Your point is really interesting about, like, hey, they got, some guys who aren't going to make it, even if they make it to the pros, they're not going to last that long. They're not going to get maybe that second contract, right, which is where the money is. And they can make as much money as they would make in the pros in those 4 years. Now they're stacking their money in 4 years. And if they make the pros and they get one contract or a couple of years, that's just a bonus. I mean, it's very, very interesting, because I remember, I had a kid that played for me in high school. He was a tight end, played in the NFL for like 5 years, and this is before he played at Temple. This was before NIL. And, when he got his 5 year, like, he told me, like, that was, hey, I got to my second contract. That was a big deal, because now I have enough money. He only lasted 1 or 2 more years, but that was enough money for me to be able to, he always says, gave me the greatest jump start of my life, but now these guys are getting a jump start at 18 years old. Right. So now by the time they get to 22, it is interesting, because the college, we talked about this a little bit, and I think it's accelerated a lot more since we talked about this in the fall, but it was like, it's almost like it's like a baseball model with like the minor leagues, right? You have single A, double A, triple A, right? Well, the NFL, right? It's the same thing. Like single A is like the guys that are at like Division II, maybe Division III. You may never get out of that area. All the way up to like triple A ball, right? Which is the Division I guys. And so, you're trying to constantly move up, right? And
which is totally different than the model that used to be. You know, like if you were that D2 guy or that FCS guy, like there was no transferring up. Like that didn't happen, right?
Right, you
Like,
transfer down.
guys could come down, right?
come
And
down.
then you're good to go, but nobody went up. Now we're seeing, you know, you see a guy like, you know, obviously because it's local, Monmouth University, kid leads their league in receptions, yards per game, all this kind of stuff. Now what happens? He's got 1 year of eligibility left. He's gone out the window. And now he's at a higher level. I mean, you're seeing a lot more of that movement, which that was never the case.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a crazy time. I mean, you got whole staffs, you know, personnel departments now that have, again, very similar to the NFL, the staffs in college football have a college scouting department now that actually scout players at other schools, anticipating them entering the transfer portal. So like a lot of these programs will have players graded on all their rival teams, just being ready as soon as someone enters the portal. So they have an evaluation on them. They know what they think about them, just like the NFL. In the NFL,
right,
there's a pro scouting department.
Free agent, right? Like,
yeah,
this guy's only got 1 year left on his deal. Or
exactly. Well, they know he's gonna be a free agent, but they actually scout every player in the league. So like my buddy who's a pro scout for one of the NFL teams, like they'll actually go during the season and scout every player in the NFL, even if they're on a 5-year deal at their current. They'll scout, you know, anyone. They'll scout Patrick Mahomes and put a grade on Patrick Mahomes, and just so they have it if they ever need it, right? If something comes up or a trade opportunity comes up, or they're so the college teams are doing the same thing because you never know who's going to hit the portal.
It is absolutely insane. It's wild.
I have one final question for you. Now you're on the media side, you know, in both phases, broadcasting, podcasts. You know, you go out to these schools, you meet with the coaches. What you're doing, and there are other guys like Derek talked about the pivot, right? So ex-players, you know, and broadcasters doing a podcast. Obviously, you have a podcast which is very unique. You're going out and you meet with players, coaches, you know, and you're going out when you hit the road. What do you see as like, you know, like since you started doing all this stuff, what have you seen as some of the great opportunities out there? You don't have to share all your secrets, though. We'll take them. We'll take them. But some of the things that you see as like opportunities that you find really exciting in the media place.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. I think attention is going to this thing right here, the cell phone. So we know that, but I'm a big believer in video content. I really believe that the ability to have one video get hundreds of thousands of views or millions of views, like the difference is if I write a tweet that gets a lot of views, or if I do a long form podcast that gets a lot of views, yeah, that gets a lot of attention. But if I have a video, a short form vertical video, a minute long that gets 1 million views, I mean, everyone sees it. You know what I mean? Like the reach is ridiculous. I got my grandma sending it to me because one of her friends sent it to her because they saw it on TikTok. So where like you just don't get that kind of.
She's got some cool friends, bro.
Yeah. You don't get that virality on a YouTube long form video. You don't get that virality on the Twitter written content. Now, I do think that podcast, as you guys know, is great for building a community. It's great for monetizing an audience. It's sponsors and advertisers love it because people that listen to you long term or for long forms of time are going to more likely to kind of buy products or support sponsors or things like that. But I'm a big believer in just video content. I think that it's the kind of basis of everything that I've done. And you know, I've always said I kind of have approached the broadcasting media world from a content first perspective. Instead of like the old days, it was you go on TV, you get a lot of followers, then maybe you start to post some stuff on social media. I was kind of, let's build a social media following, then try to get into television, then try to get into broadcasting and build a career that way. So I think there's tons of opportunity in video content. And, you know, really for athletes, we're seeing athlete-driven media as the future. People want to hear right from the athletes themselves instead of going on a press conference after the game, instead of going on, you know, a show on ESPN. The athletes are actually hosting their own shows and talking about the game and what went wrong, what went well. And that's going to continue. Athletes want to have podcasts. They want to be heard. They want to create content. And we're seeing it now at scale across a bunch of college football programs in the country.
Yeah, I saw the scale on it is amazing. How they're all putting out content. I mean, like Micah Parsons, one person podcast, right? Yeah.
Right. You got the Kelsey brothers, right? You got Bustin' with the Boys.
Kelsey brothers are
all of these.
They're huge.
Almost every guy on Monday, Tuesday, that off day in the NFL, is sitting down doing a podcast.
I thought Micah's was so interesting because he just basically grabs the mic and just talks, right? Like the Kelsey brothers are obviously they're media moguls now,
right? And Jason's only
dating Taylor Swift, So, but Micah Parsons just grabs the mic, sits in front of TikTok or and just starts talking, and and thousands and thousands and probably millions of followers are watching everything he says, good, bad, or indifferent. And it's so interesting because you're like, he's putting you in his mind right now. No, like, filter really. Like, I mean, they probably filter a little bit, obviously, because they play for a team and the NFL has that contract. If you do something crazy, they can get rid of you. But within reason, they are unfiltered. And I think that's like mind blowing. Like, it's not just about the interviewer or of someone interviewing another person. It's about their thoughts. And I think coaches will become more and more involved in that process over time. Like, I believe that the colleges, if they're going to allow the players to do what they need to do, which is great. And I saw like I remember seeing the video, like Clemson has all these different media rooms. You probably have been through some of these places. They got a meeting room for this, a photo shoot for this. But eventually I think coaches, so it's funny because the money started with the coaches, now followed to the players, right? But the media side, I think, will go the other way around. Like, I think as players talk a lot more about what's going on, and you kind of see it a little bit in some of these interviews when a coach is asked to answer about something a player said. But coaches are now going to have to go back to that, not just a format of when, they have a host with them, ask them their formatted questions for their 60-minute for their local fans, but to be able to talk about their thoughts about everything, because I don't know if coaches will like that very much, but that's kind of where a lot of it's going. Like, I see some of the guys that are much more forward about, like Dan Lanning's one that comes right to mind, right? Like,
he's great.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff Halfley did it on your podcast. Like,
great.
You were blown away by that. Like, I'm friends with Jeff. I've known him for a long time, and I was blown away by that. I was blown away by that podcast and how open Jeff was, and literally. What, a day later, right? He went to the Packers.
Like, you were probably in the building.
So I filmed it the week before, and then and then dropped it. But the day we dropped it like that morning, and then that night,
and then the afternoon he made.
The thing like got 20x the viewership because of all the Packers fans were watching it.
Yeah, that's a good fan base to hit on. But like, look, I was just. Obviously, look, you played for Coach Franklin, right? Like, so he's going to be a little more open and a little more whatever. But just, like, the amount of guys that you've been able to get into the building with, and for a lot of cases, guys that, like you said, are those coaches that are really kind of, they keep it close to the hip, right? They don't really talk about certain things. I mean, look, I really became all in when you got Coach Schiano to open up the way he did, because look, he's been through it, right? NFL. I mean, he talked about
he's not that open. He's not that open. He's not.
Look, and that's coming from New Jersey coaches who literally have, we're in the room with him on the regular, right? I mean, one of my best friends is on his staff, right? But yet, he so keeps it close to the hip. So the fact that you were able to get in there and have those conversations, and look, I think it's like it's just like in the way you explained about coaching. And it's always been my philosophy on how to coach is that when these guys really believe that you care about them on a different level off the field, it's not just about X's and O's. They're now getting more comfortable with you, and they're willing to literally run through a wall and do whatever it takes to kind of get there. And I think that's kind of the way it kind of goes, but it's also, look, you can put that out there. You can think you have that kind of relationship, and that guy that you just, mentored and coached and did all that stuff for 3 years, he might get a better NIL deal and be out the door the next year, right? It's really kind of crazy how that world has really that's what it is.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, it's a wild world, man. Crazy time we're living in college football. It's a fun time for sure. I mean, our like I said earlier, our game's never been stronger, but it's been just going to be a good 2024.
Dude, it was fantastic having you on. Thank you so much for coming on.
Appreciate you, man.
Anything you need to plug for any of your sponsors?
Yeah, go for it. Plug
No, I'm good. I'm good. I take care of the sponsors enough. I don't want to do
Yeah,
this
man.
stuff. But
Keep eating those athletic greens, buddy.
yeah, no doubt. AG1 all day, baby.
Look, I see you're on the workout grind, trying to get back into it and whatnot. I mean, look, some of us only wish we were ever 6 foot, bro. So keep it going.
Yeah, I'm trying to get back into playing shape. So we'll see how it goes.
Well, now you can afford that knee surgery if you need another one.
No, I can't do it, man. I can't do it. But no, I appreciate you guys having me on. This was fun, and we'll do it again this coming season.
Yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
you, have a great day.
Anything we can do for you, just reach out. Like you said, anything we can do to kind of help you. Really appreciate you taking the time and kind of giving us a really in-depth, kind of different perspective, which is unique to only you, because I don't think anybody else has this perspective or has taken that path that you have, especially, at such an accelerated pace with you being so young and whatnot. So, man, we really appreciate what you do for the game and everything. So, like I said, if we can do anything or anything like that, just let us know. Appreciate it,
man. Thanks, guys.
All right, Adam.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.
Thanks, Adam.
Fantastic podcast. That was great. It's great talking to him. I learned a ton. How about that? So
well, listen,
I really learned a ton.
It was some of the things that we have been saying, right? But now maybe some people now can look at it and say, all right, that really is what needs to be done, or that's really what's going on in that world. I mean, look, his perspective from being a coach, right? And look, I got my intern looking at my DMs and doing all that kind of stuff. Yeah, we've been telling you, when you're actually, you're tweeting or you're texting a coach, it's not really the coach, bro. You know what I mean?
That's exactly
these are the things
right.
we're talking about. And then, hey, you got to put in the work, right? I was a 5-star, I had my hands in the rice, squeezing for grip. I was working over the hand catches. I was he was the fact that he brought up the attention to detail about hey, my eye strips under my eyes for the lights. If you don't care about this game that much, bro, go.
I think the recruiting insight was very valuable. Which
look, that's kind of that's our bread and butter, right? That's kind of what people look to us for. So
it's funny because you try to tell people to talk to the analysts, and when you talk, me, for example, I'm talking to parents stuff, and try to say, hey, talk to the. It's not everyone wants to talk to the head coach, right? And they don't realize that the head coach has certain relationships with people, and outside of that, they're really not gonna they're not gonna get to your stuff right away. You got to work your way up the ladder. I thought that was really interesting that I learned a ton on, hey, reaching out to, the GAs, the analysts, the guys who are
staffer, just anybody that's associated.
Get the ball rolling.
And here's the deal. Now we can look at it, right? Because some guys used to use it you got a message from that's the assistant receivers coach. That's not the receivers coach. It's that's the guy that's really doing the recruiting work, right?
Get along with him.
Don't downplay or don't blow off any one of these guys. That could be your ticket,
Absolutely. No, there's no doubt about it. I mean, he has a unique insight in the sense
very much so. Different
top
angle,
tier
bro.
player. Yeah, top tier player.
And just even
who would have been a big time NFL guy that got injured, who then became a coach and now is a broadcaster. I thought that is probably one of the most unique mixes.
Nobody has done that. And also to hear him talk about, look, man, I was a 2-year All-American catching 70 passes a game. I'm at the NFL Combine, and I'm literally told your career's over. Imagine having to deal with that at his age and overcome that adversity, and now, boom. You know what I'm saying?
No, it's definitely different.
Good dude too. Good dude.
Really good. That was a great podcast.
Good stuff.
And we'll go from there. Let's wrap it up. Great podcast. I don't think anything more has to be said.